This is the image text panel. My name is Duncan MacKenzie.
I'm Richard Holland, and we're from Batted Sports.
I think we think of this panel as who really owns the internet, and it's a battle kind of to the death. I'm putting my money on Josh. He's there at the end. It sort of seems like he's got a wicked blade under that coat.
I'm good at sports. Can we get their mics on? I'll forfeit.
Forrest is just cashed out already. So, Richard and I are from Batted Sports. We are moderating the panel. One of our panelists is missing. Her name is Paddy Johnson. She is on her way, I promise. The panelists we have in front of us are Forrest Nash from Contemporary Art Daily. Love it. One fan sparked it all.
Thank you.
And Josh Baer from Baer Faxt.
That's right.
So we thought that the best thing to do was start by introducing the projects a little bit, and we decided that most of us have intensely visual blogs on the internet, which you can access via your smartphones right now. So we thought we would just talk about them a little bit to get things rolling. Richard and I, for instance, for the last 420 weeks have run a podcast out of Chicago called Batted Sports, which has also grown up to be a large critical contemporary art blog.
I thought that was a perfectly good description, and I don't have anything to add or be critical about it.
We often like to think of our show sitting somewhere between the BBC and Howard Stern, but only really focusing on contemporary art. Forrest Nash.
I run a project called Contemporary Art Daily. We are actually a small nonprofit organization, and all the work we do is essentially trying to both advance a kind of curatorial idea about art, and then also to improve the public's access to art, especially documentation using the internet. So Contemporary Art Daily has a really simple premise. We choose at least one exhibition that's happening somewhere around the world every day, and we work directly with the galleries and museums to get very high quality, often exclusive documentation that we then publish and make freely available to anyone who wants to see it. So we don't do our own writing, we don't sort of frame the content at all, we just present exhibitions in a fairly straightforward format. We're working on our sort of second major project, which hopefully won't take too much longer, which will be called Contemporary Art Quarterly, and that will be deep archives of individual artists. So we'll trace the entire history of their practices and try to accumulate as much documentation as we can and present it all at once. So that's sort of what's on the horizon for us.
I'm Josh Baer. First of all, I'd like to thank Tony and Patricia, everybody at Expo Chicago. Each year is getting better and better. Thank you for having us.
Bring in some class to the panel, Josh.
Well, I'm the oldest, so it's like...
He's going to be the moderator, I'm telling you.
And I publish a newsletter called the Baer Faxt, which is sold by subscription. I don't blog, I don't tweet, I don't Facebook, I don't tumble. I will rumble, but I won't tumble. And my day job, I'm really an art advisor, working with clients. And you'll be surprised to hear this. I'm probably the only one here who, as of this week, is working as a consultant to one of the world's biggest internet companies, which will be, this is news I'm making, that will be entering the art market in the next year or so. Company, anybody heard of eBay? Okay, well.
What do they do at the eBay?
They sell stuff. They sell like $100 billion worth of stuff a year, so we're going to help them maybe help people sell art. So that's a news thing. So as somebody who's like not blogging, not doing any of this internet stuff, I am working for what may be perceived as an evil empire, or not, we'll see, to enter the art field. So
you also have another distinction in that you're Baer
good at
Faxt.
sports.
Yeah, well, you're good at sports, so there's that. But also, Baer Faxt began as an actual fax, right?
Anybody know what a fax machine is? You've heard of it? It's a play on terms. It's like a typewriter.
Well, you actually, and Duncan, you're not mentioning the earlier project you had, which was Baer Wax Tablet.
cuneiform. You're just carving hash marks. No, but because it existed as a kind of analog device, and
it had an ability to get news out immediately, meaning a fax, when there was no internet to compete with. It was like 10 weeks till an art magazine would have news. Only a local newspaper could react quickly, and we all know they don't do very much art coverage, certainly not much art news, much less art criticism. So 20 years ago, I thought, well, people want to know today what's going on. They want to be able to sit at a dinner and say, did you hear blah, blah? Now we're so used to information moving so quickly that it's kind of a different landscape than 20 years ago. But information is, we want to know right now something.
With your project, have you found that you have transitioned over time from being a more immediate supplemental news source to, at this point, being, as there has been a rather precipitous decline in arts reporting and living paid arts journalists? I mean, do you find that you have become increasingly a primary news source where, I mean, you have gone from sort of being the sort of scrappy alternative, like quick and you know, before everybody else news source to something that's much more the establishment?
I think it got to be primary and establishment pretty quickly because the art world was much smaller. So the people that needed to know found out about it from each other pretty quickly. I'd say the challenge for me is to stay relevant when there's so much information being pushed out so quickly, people aggregating information, and it's hard for me to make sure that what I'm doing is fresh. So it's actually going the other way to make sure that I'm not like a BlackBerry that's going to be obsolete.
So I want to make sure that everybody has a sense of what gets translated over Baer Faxt, right? Because Baer Faxt actually takes the form of essentially like an email that has a series of tweets about what's going on, right? That like there's one sentence about this person left whatever museum, or this person got this big grant, or these were the auction results for Sotheby's that day.
So I don't write. It's just
it's
bullet point information.
Yeah, really bullet pointy. And it's funny because over the years I've often heard stories of gallerists sort of like sitting waiting for their Baer Faxt because it sort of became a kind of gospel to me.
Well, it's not exactly page 6, so it's not.
Well, it's not who's sleeping with who, but it is.
But who's suing who, maybe. And it's got a much smaller readership. At least I only know the people who subscribe or get it than any of you do, but I can guarantee you that when people get it, they read it right then. They know it's going to take them 45 seconds, and whether it's Larry Gagosian reading it, or this, you know, Madeline and Greenstein from the MTA, I know they're going to read it in 2 minutes and digest it. So it's not about, what I find difficult with blogs is it become about the blogger way too often. And I'm trying to make this not about me.
How dare you, sir?
I know, it's really, you know.
Well, just in time we have a blogger here to defend bloggers.
It's all about her.
Patty Johnson
Making her entrance.
Hi, Patty.
Patty, you're going to go right in the middle there. Everyone, Patty Johnson from Art F City.
Don't get taxi number for directions.
So,
I don't have anything to say about that.
Patty, just to bring you up to speed with where we are, we were sort of in the process of introducing everybody's projects. So I know you're a bit harried and it's not fair to put you on the spot, but now I'm going to do just that. And I would like you to tell all of these humans about Art F City.
Sure. Well, first, apologies if this introduction is done within many breaths. I ran here once I got out of the taxi, so I'm a little short in breath. And a little red in the face.
But you wear it well.
But yeah, so Art F City was originally named Art Fag City. We changed the name recently, a couple months ago. It's now more sponsor friendly, more email friendly, more Facebook friendly, less. I like the name a little bit less. I'm probably not supposed to say that, but that's the way it is. But in any event, it was named Faxt City in 2005, which is when I founded the blog. And it was just me on a Blogspot blog. And from there, I built the blog into a multi-authored blog. All that has been relatively recently. Those are relatively recent changes that happened in about 2011, 2012. And we are currently seeking nonprofit status.
So we were sort of starting to get our arms around the questions around the form that things take and the audience they're reaching. When we were thinking about Josh's Baer Faxt goes to our world insiders, and it's with a notion of kind of exclusivity, but it's insider information, like who bought what at what auction, which is not news my parents might want. But on the other hand, Forrest and Nash Contemporary Art Daily is showing us some of the best stuff from around the globe that we would not have an opportunity to see, whether it be in Zurich, London, Berlin, Singapore, wherever that art is. Paddy's project, Faxt City, takes a different kind of tone, which is maybe a little more like ours, which is directly critical. That it's not a kind of aggregator, and it seeks to kind of participate in a dialogue that starts with criticality.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say that. I would say that, we've actually quoted things from your mailer that were critical. That's something we sort of try to champion. We are definitely interested in polemics and even advocate for it.
Well, content is king. Particularly with the internet and what's going on with publishing, content is the only thing that will last. Technology gets beaten up, becomes obsolete. I would argue that even New York Times will be obsolete in the sense of we'll care what Tom Friedman, the writer, is saying. That's the brand. It's ultimately the one that's providing the content. It just becomes this responsibility of how to vet content when there's so much coming at you. Where do I go?
What does that even mean, though? Like, what does content is king mean? 'Cause I feel like there's there are the blogs or publications that I think are successful at least in part because of volume.
It depends how you're defining success. I mean, is it most eyeballs? Is that success? Is it most revenue? Is that success? Is it best critical thinking?
What's success for you?
For me, for what I'm doing?
Yeah.
Well, people vote with their wallets with me, so if I'm doing a bad job, they'll let me know, they'll stop subscribing. So, and then success is internal with, do I think I'm doing a good job? That's probably the most important, metric I'm using. I mean, there's just so much stuff I read that's just not so out there. And once it's online, everything is a fact. So I think what's success is somebody who has really most sophisticated or interesting or newsworthy way of getting me information, whether it's a blog or a newspaper. It's different for everybody in this room.
And what's your measure of success, Paddy? I like this question. Let's put it on the table.
I think we have a bunch. I mean, I think we have the same sort of internal metric. Like, are we proud of this piece? Like, do we stand up? Well, pretty much everything we publish, we stand behind. But I think a certain amount of pride is important. I think also we measure success by how much traffic we get. That sounds ugly, but we get paid and there's a direct relationship to how much we get paid from advertising revenue and how well we're doing traffic-wise. So, and it's not just that. I think traffic isn't just how many people have we had on the site, but how many people are talking about what we're doing, how those sorts of things. And then we do a number of external projects, and those are becoming bigger parts of the blog where we engage with artists, and this means bringing image management back, which is an essay series we did that worked directly with artists and sort of archives of images that they had. Working with artists to produce works on and offline. So some of those projects are yet to be revealed, but.
Forrest, can you guess what's going to happen now?
Yes. So I think I have a few layers of criteria, and I'll focus specifically on Contemporary Art Daily. The first one that we try to think about is imagining a hypothetical person who only has enough time to look at the 1 or 2 exhibitions we present every day. We want, in a kind of journalistic way, to feel like we're giving them, if not a perfect, a reasonable approximation of the diversity of things that are going on in the kind of global art discourse. So we want to make sure that we're covering as many of the kind of conversations that are happening in parallel as possible. Then within that, we want to try to represent what we think are the best examples of each conversation or set of ideas or approaches, and to take some kind of a curatorial position about what we think is going to end up being a sort of important form of whatever it is that we're looking at and thinking about. In terms of measuring success, I think obviously there's my subjective sense of how well we're doing and how much as a consumer I would like looking at our project every day. But I also think now in November we'll have our 5th anniversary, and I think one sort of slower metric that is very important to me as a sort of quasi-curator is thinking about the artists that we were particularly championing right at the beginning, who were maybe somewhat obscure and who didn't enjoy a kind of international visibility, and not because of us at all or anything like that, but seeing that there's some correspondence between what I was interested in and thought was important and what is now emerging through this sort of nebulous meritocracy of the art world as something that's also important to other people. That's a very important criteria to me. Also, quality is important to us in terms of the materials we get. So I'm sort of never satisfied with any given body of documentation. I'm always harassing whatever institution we're working with to get more images, more video, more permission to make stuff that otherwise, there's lots of documentation that exists, but part of what we try to do is take documentation that's only available to sort of interested collectors or insiders, the sort of people who might subscribe to the Baer Facts, and publishing that material publicly. And that's always a negotiation. That's a very clear metric, is how much stuff did we convince them to let us put on our website.
So how do you guys choose what's in the New York Times vernacular, how do you choose what news is fit to print?
Well, for us, because it's a very clear, people talk about the phrase binary criticism. I mean, our sort of critical or curatorial voice comes out in the difference between saying yes to one thing and saying no to another thing. Our conversations in the office about what we are or are not going to publish, again, I think kind of balance these curatorial motives against journalistic motives. So on the one hand, we want to represent what's going on in the world, but on the other hand, we want to do it from an opinionated perspective, and we want to, in some way, be influencing that conversation even as we're chronicling it. And I think we've just kind of evolved a balance that's pretty intuitive. When we go through, we're looking at a huge volume of exhibitions. We probably consider, between our own research and submissions, a couple thousand exhibitions every month. And so we're pretty practiced at this point, and it's just...
So it's like the Supreme Court definition of pornography, right?
Yes,
you see it.
Right. Yeah, to an extent. But I mean, it's also there are certain things that are obviously things we want to include, and things that are obvious that we wouldn't want to include. And so the finer points come out in those cases where maybe there's internal disagreement or where...
What obviously wouldn't what wouldn't you want to include? Like the Keen painting retrospective or something?
Well, I think a lot of what we, like the first threshold of eligibility for us is a sense of being interconnected to the other artists that we're looking at, and that's just a very sort of literal criteria because we can look and say, is this person exhibiting at venues with other artists who we've chronicled, and can we sort of map our way back to any other given node in the system from this particular point? And if they're completely isolated, if they're, for example, let's say a Brazilian artist who works with only one Brazilian gallerist, and that gallerist shows only Brazilian artists and there's no overlap, that isn't, it's not something we would say is bad or not good art or anything like that, but it's not our purview because we're interested in this sort of global, interconnected conversation. And so, that's an example of something that we would immediately say isn't part of our band.
So is your mission more than, you're not necessarily the voice of validation, more sort of the interpreter of validation? So it's like, oh, well, that's somebody who is this far along in terms of the overall macro system, whatever that is. So therefore, they're on the radar. So if somebody is not yet made it, whatever the threshold is, past that threshold.
Well, yes, although it's not necessarily so linear. There are lots of different art worlds, and there are lots of different sort of trajectories that someone can take. But I think for us, we cover things that are by extremely established artists and by extremely young artists. I think for us, it's more just we need to be able to establish that there's some linkage between a given artist and a given venue. We also care a lot about where the show is happening. We want to be able to establish some sense of dialogue between that space and that artist associatively over to the broader system. Like ICS is just sort of looking at a very rich system and trying to distill it or represent it, albeit in an opinionated way.
When you said extremely young artists, I had this vision of all of the sort of ill-behaving Brooklyn mommies that are so much in the press right now, forcing their kids into art careers at 2.5.
We get every couple weeks or so we'll get a very funny press release about a 13-year-old from some island in the UK who paints horses and is commanding really high prices in the art world, which is why we're going to publish their exhibition.
You should send that to us.
Yes,
we would be interested.
Yes, we can develop a back channel because we always think about this and we would never do it because it doesn't fit with what we're trying to do, but we get so much crazy material.
I was going to say, Paddy's usually where I learn about the truly preposterous and horrifying.
Exactly. No, we have a lot of that, but it stays, unfortunately, hidden in the office.
It's funny that for us, that's really the counter to how we sort of curate, and I use the term incredibly loosely for our project, because we think about it in terms of it's a multi-voice platform also, and we sort of say we trust you and your judgment and like you and your writing for whatever reason, and just go do what you do, and then sort of try and represent a cacophony of voices that way. But we don't ruthlessly edit things. We don't. In fact, mostly we don't edit unless the contributor asks us to, or somebody emails us and is like, "This fact is just wrong."
Well, but also, we have a very decentralized. I think our goal is we don't have this sort of formal financial infrastructure that the other table does. So that we're so in that regard, we've chosen through laziness generally to not be answerable in that regard. Well, so if some dipshit who's writing for us writes something horrible, we could just call them up and say, hey, cut that out, please, because if you get me sued, I'll be angry.
I think maybe
as opposed to having sponsors
collaborators dipshits.
No, I'm saying the person who would write to something that was particularly egregious would be a dipshit. I think that's fair. Generally, they're all wonderful and delightful geniuses.
Collaborator.
I don't think we have any ill-behaved people right now. We've had a few.
But yeah, we are also the only project on the table that is 100% volunteer run, and no one ever gets paid at that point. So that's a little. We have no financial infrastructure, and have never sought to build any, which might seem ill-considered.
Yeah. Let's move on to somebody's work.
Paddy, how do you guys decide what you run?
Well, I guess it's a combination of things. I mean, for one thing, the blog is very interested in criticism and therefore activism because sort of as a general working ethos within the blog, we believe that good criticism, like a good critic, is an activist in some capacity, and that has a lot to do with today's context. I think activism is needed. So when we see a debate or a concern that needs an opinion, then that is something that we respond to or try to respond to as quickly as possible. Within the blog structure too, though, we also each author, there are 5 people who currently work at AFC on a regular basis, 3 of which are contributors, myself, Whitney, Kimball, and Karina Kirsch. And so the 3 of us all have separate interests and several core interests. So, I'm at an art fair. I happen to be interested in art fairs. I'll be covering this art fair, this sort of thing. I'm also very interested in anything that comes from Canada as a Canadian. So, for example, today, Rob Ford, Toronto's mayor, just had his portrait painted, and it's amazing. It's so bad. It's good. It's like
it's awful.
Oh, it's amazing. So you have to see that. I put it on the blog today. I'm like, it's the thing that makes me most happy today.
Is that the same Toronto mayor they caught buying crack?
Allegedly smoking crack on video.
Allegedly, I apologize.
Yes.
Same can be said of you, Duncan. Is it a Canadian thing?
And
Apologizing is.
So Canadian things tend to fall under my purview. Karina tends to like horses. So we have a lot of horses.
I've learned so much about you in this panel discussion already.
And Whitney sees more art than probably Jerry Saltz. So she does anything that has to do with emerging art and is very, very good at that.
I'm interested in what you said about activism, because in a certain way that establishes maybe some of the clearest criteria of any of us up here. I mean, if you identify, say, an issue that you feel passionate about and therefore want to do activism about, have you been able to see results after the fact? Like, is there a case where you can identify that you have taken a particular position and advocated for something and then it's happened? Or
I mean, yes and no. I mean, so, for example, last year the Sotheby's art handlers had a strike, and they were locked out because of contract negotiations, and I thought that Sotheby's was treating them very poorly. And I was attempting to talk to Sotheby's. They were not super forthcoming. I spoke a lot with the labor union, and we wrote a petition in support of the art handlers, and it got a lot of signatures. It went out on eFlux. We collaborated with them, and I guess it was like maybe it was like a month later, the news came out that the Sotheby's art handlers had settled their contract, and I think a lot of people attributed that win to. In part, at least, to the work that we had done. Now, for all of you here today, I'm going to tell you that I think is a myth that I have let live.
Well, but don't undercredit yourself, because I think that you really, I applaud you, and I did at the time. I think it's really something to be very proud of, that you took a stand and you were public about it, and you organized, and you took the time to get the full story, which I think not a lot of people would do. So. Well,
no. I mean, I'm not trying to discredit what we did. I think what we did was incredibly important, and I think that the belief that petition had power is really important. But I think the nuts and bolts of it are, behind the scenes, I think that the handlers got word that they had a new, Sotheby's had hired a new lawyer. The lawyer was going to present a new labor contract that would push them all out of their jobs completely. And so they signed the shitty contract in the last hour. So it didn't really have anything to do with us, I don't think. That was sort of a nasty end of the story that didn't get reported, and we didn't report it. We didn't report it because I thought it was more important to give the people who had signed that, that petition some sort of win. But I think the undertold story is one that doesn't give anybody any agency. So I tell it now, hoping that it doesn't go too far. But
I'm going to take a different tack. This is a perfect example of the information going out partly. Because the most important thing you said there was Sotheby's wouldn't talk about their position, which was this moronic PR move. And those workers, as part of the Teamsters, did a brilliant PR job. The fact is, this is where I'm sort of insider, many of the things those art handlers were asking for, Manning, were wrong and ridiculous. Okay, they wanted to be able to handle work they didn't know how to handle. And when an expert would come in and say, I am the world's expert at handling such and such, the art handler said, no, you can't. And they said, we're going to break this thing. And it's like a $12 million object. You don't know what you're doing. They wanted partially no-show jobs. Now, none of that information came out. That's never been out there. Sotheby's did an abysmal job of making their case because they were in a losing position as being the rich, evil guys there beating up on these 30 poor guys. So the whole story never came out. You tried to get that story. Other people tried to get that story. Sotheby's wouldn't get it. So now we have a partial story out there. That's going to be history, right? It'll never get readjusted as to what was going on. The power plays for the guys within the Teamsters were trying to use these art handlers for their own union benefits. They did a great job for themselves. But it's like, we're over-informed and undereducated. I'm not saying just all the time. All of us, myself included, we think we know it because we read it someplace, whether it's New York Times or someplace else. I know you're looking at me not happy with me, but they're and trust me, I campaigned against the war in Vietnam and for the Black Panthers, and I'm a card-carrying liberal and all that, even though I'm an art advisor, sorry. But.
No. I mean, I'm actually interested to hear the bit of information about how they needed to handle experts and couldn't do it. But that's not the information that was out there. The information that was out there was that they wanted to handle unskilled laborers at cheaper costs. So, I mean, it just seems silly to me that nobody would know that particular piece of information since it's essential.
There's a really good article here. Anybody wants to write it? It's a comprehensive story. I'm already totally engaged.
We talked earlier about not answering the questions, and I want to say I think it's, I do news, I don't do criticism. I think critics have been so marginalized lately by the market as to make them the most difficult spot in the whole spectrum of what counts between artists, dealers, curators, and critics. It's a very difficult time for criticism in general. We've been marginalized, trying to figure out how to fight back. So I think, and parenthetically, I think the people taken over as being critics are the dealers, because they are the Clement Greenbergs for a time of saying what's good, which is a very odd state to be, rather than Clement Greenberg, if you like, or whoever.
Well, that's probably only true in America, though, I would think. I mean, in Europe, there's still a much more prominent institutional apparatus, and I think more kind of plays out in Kunsthalles than just in galleries. I mean, in America, because our museums are juggling so many different priorities, I think you're absolutely right. But do you think that's also true in Europe? That galleries are exclusively sort of dictating
What's good?
what's good?
I don't live there. I suspect they have more influence than they should. I mean, we should have the critic being more primary because of their independence of speaking on our behalf and to us. And I would like the critic to be more powerful in that sense.
I don't understand this at all. Because from my perspective, I mean, I wouldn't argue that the critic doesn't have that much power, but I would question the proposition that Larry Gagosian, the guy who owns more showrooms than anybody else in the world, is like, you know, a great critic. Like, I don't think
Marion Goodman, Paula Cooper, Barbara Gladstone, when they take on an artist, every museum suddenly says that's a great artist. And that's who David Werner, they're doing their shows on that. The public is influenced, what are the best shows, what are the best artists, by these people. I'm not saying they're doing it in a deliberately bad way, but they've gotten that responsibility. Larry's his own case, I think, to ever use Larry as an illustration for anything in the marketplace where the art world is problematic because there's only one of him. And it just...
Well, but I mean, the other thing I would say is that it gets murky because someone at the level of, you know, Barbara Gladstone or Paula Cooper, they're looking at smaller galleries and relying on other filters. I mean, it's very rare that they're sort of going out and initiating a career from the ground up. So it's sort of, I think there's always one person further back in the chain, and it's hard to say where the point of inflection is, like who's really, you know, the more influential at what point. But I think definitely, at least in America, it's just easy to establish dealers in aggregate as the important filter because there's not anything else that has any kind of track record of showing things. Like anything at a museum yet has already been very clearly validated by the market in almost every case, and there's not enough of a...
The market has moved before the museums,
right,
before the critics even had a chance. I mean, the Rubels are more important for what they're doing, it would seem. I'm not believing that's actually the case or should be the case, but they're given that role. If it's there, that's the way before, you know, not even Jerry Saltz or whatever, a team of critics have gone into that work. It's gone so fast that it's jumped past thoughtful criticism. Speed is too quick. Well, and no one's seen shows anyways, so it's all, you know, that's a big problem as it is. We're all at the computer way too much time getting information, not going out and seeing art.
Yeah,
we're seeing it on Contemporary Art Daily, sir.
You're seeing that show.
Yeah, Duncan's up in front of the computer. That's probably not what he's looking at. It's an internet porn show. I did tell you in our email that there'd be at least one take show. We're not there yet. You know, it's interesting though because I feel like we're speaking sort of obviously in broad brush terms, but I feel like we're slightly guilty of propagating the myth of there's a formula. The whole Europe versus the United States, and it seems like everybody's career is different, everybody's experience is different, the market reacts to everybody differently. I mean, I think that there are certain commonalities, but at the same, I'm of two minds with this, and at the same time, the other side of the coin is like every business ever, whether we're talking about art or we're talking about, whatever, selling tires. There's got to be some sort of system of validation and some sort of system in place so that people can, one, find out about stuff, and two, find out about who are the sort of key opinion leaders in the business that are worth paying attention to. And I think one of the, to actually bring it sort of back to the topic, I think one of the interesting things about having this conversation and the people sitting up here on stage, at least that's on the stage, is how we've had this sort of shake up some of the formal structures in terms of reporting in journalism. I mean, everybody talks about our critics and the death of them, and whatever. But I don't look at it as so much a negative as a sort of new supply of sources of information. I mean, you know, what all three of you, well, you've been at it for a little while longer, but like the internet sort of has suddenly given me a wealth of information that isn't Flash Art or Forum or October or whatever, that I think gives more opportunity and more chances for people to have participation in the system that aren't the standard methods of before. So I guess I'm a little, the whole Europe versus the US approach, I think is maybe a little too broad brush a statement in terms of an assumption that somehow, you know, if you follow all the right steps and you go to the right school and you show up and do this and that, you'll be successful.
Oh yeah, there's certainly not a formula that an individual can use to be successful, but I think part of what we're talking about is just sort of different power centers or something. And I mean, when you were introducing, you were talking about like winning the internet or something, and that's a joke. But on the other hand, you know, I think
on the other hand, we won. Boom. Step back.
Exactly. Well, I mean, on the other hand, I think like in selecting the three of us, we've kind of isolated three different, not new centers of agency in influencing the art world on the level of a kind of broader discourse. So the market, criticism, and a sort of more curatorial approach. You know, these are often, even before the internet, how people would try to have a say about what art matters and what art doesn't matter, and how we understand the art that's in front of us. And I think even if, of course, none of these things apply perfectly at a granular level in all cases, I think it is possible to talk about sort of who dictates, you know, the career of most artists most of the time. And I think, I do think, for example, that it is very different in Europe and America, and that mostly just has to do with economics and how their systems, how the competing systems of, you know, sort of no government support here and heavy government support there changes the meritocracy.
So Paddy, who makes the choices? Who calls the shots? Who's secretly controlling the system?
Josh.
Maybe.
Well, I am a straight, white, Jewish male. So that's like 0 for 4 or something.
Oh, that's a panel discussion right there. Let's do another one right after this.
I mean, I think it is an ecosystem, like Forrest and Josh was saying, that there's not necessarily a single source. Although I would want to say, and I think that this is only marginally connected, but, you know, I think one of the issues that I see you know, fairly frequently is that, you know, a lot of the major publishing houses are located in New York. And that makes sense because there's a lot of activity that goes on in New York. But, you know, there's a lot of really interesting stuff that happens around the country. And, like, all of that art that's being made in smaller communities is very much informed by the communities that are there and the economics of that particular city. And that's the stuff that I personally believe is not getting enough attention. And that's still, I think, very much a result of geography. So it's nice that the internet has solved a lot of problems, but we're still sort of struggling, I think, to sort of figure out how all of these art makers can really be more active participants.
Has the gigantic trade show art fairs been an equalizer in that regard in terms of geography?
I'm going to make a different point within that about criticism, is that a magazine like Artforum, has anybody here read an article on Artforum? Has anybody ever been able to understand a single one of them? I mean, I think they're written in Korean. which I don't read. So I think that there's a fundamental problem. That's the most powerful in my world. Publication of like it counts again an article or on the cover of all that. And so that's implying that criticism is having some role, but it's the pictures and the ads. And it's unreadable 98% of the time.
We're a big fan of art news, actually.
Well, they have shorter words. So
It's not true.
It's the USA Today of art criticism.
I don't find Artforum unreadable all the time, but I do find it to be incredibly speculative in a way that still lends to your point, which is that it's not that Artforum is mounting a persuasive case that then changes how people are talking about the work in a way that Greenberg being the iconic example did. I don't think that they are really taking clear positions. Most of the time, they're just kind of musing, and that's why I was so happy to hear Paddy talk about activism.
Being bigger around, I think, is good because it's breaking down that sort of heavy, on one hand, elitism that's couched in bad writing that aren't even sentences, passing for intellectual things based in this place called New York. That to break that down has to, because they've done such a bad job of it, that to look beyond those few things to other geographies is good, or other forms for expressing themselves.
Just a note on art form, I was in Buffalo 2 weeks ago for another art fair, so maybe it is some sort of equalizer, I don't know, based on my own experience. But when I was in Buffalo, I think one of the organizers asked me if art form had gone out of business and was convinced that it had because he hadn't seen an issue of art form in over a year.
But they got thicker.
Yeah.
They're like better door placements.
I mean, the other thing that Artforum does that is, I think, very helpful and relevant, not to be sort of the defender of Artforum, but like one of the roles I always think of publications like that is just to provide some small support system for a certain kind of intellectual. So like there are people who write for Artforum that are also doing other stranger projects and who maybe don't translate well as sort of general purpose art criticism, but who are doing interesting work and thinking about interesting things, and Artforum allows them to kind of exist somehow professionally. And I think that's, again, to link it back to Paddy, part of what I like about your model and the way you've grown and expanded is that it's no longer just about your voice, but about you being a place to nurture other people, even if they don't all do exactly the same thing, and even if they don't all use the same criteria. I think that's an important thing too. That people who are thinking interesting things and have potentially interesting things to say or do have a home, even if it's not necessarily material that we all want to read every day. I'm glad that there's somewhere where people can write like highly speculative, theoretical kind of summarizations of what's going on in art. It's not my thing, but it seems valuable, and I'd rather that more things exist than less things.
Josh, if it helps, I let my subscription lapse because I just wasn't reading it. So we have Josh for about 10 more minutes, and it seems only fair that we open up the floor to audience questions for those last 10 minutes. So, to you, audience, I say, who's got questions?
BAER. They have some pretty good, MBAs. So I think they've like 1,000 programmers that can be called on. So I think they're in good shape there. You didn't hear that one. Yeah. Well,
Yeah, that's my book.
We'll see a year from now what can be developed. That they're committed to it. They're committed to it in a serious way. I think the reason that they're doing it is that the president of eBay is a collector, and he is interested in art, happens to be a client of mine, so that's how it happened for me. And I think that you get a single person there who's interested in contemporary art in a serious way. He's a guiding force to driving that beyond the business model. We'll see, there's a year from now, we'll be able to answer that question. I don't think it's going to challenge what's going on in this building or what I do in my day job, but I think it can work. There's over 3 million artists in America.
No, but you know what? I think it might affect the secondary market, which is sort of the bread and butter of a lot of their galleries. And I think that what I think is interesting about it, because when you said it at first, my first reaction was, hey. But then I think about it more, and it's like I would never have imagined that eBay would be a place where one could sell a car or real estate, or and all of these things have at first been scoffed at and have since come to pass. So, Lord knows I've spent enough money or books on eBay to end up in divorce court. So, I think that it's entirely possible that could catch on as a good secondary market source for things.
Actually, it seems like a much more viable or better suited platform than Amazon, because there's all this space already there for provenance and condition and things that
and there's accountability.
Amazon has already
it's done in escrow.
done badly.
I can see it.
Well, as you said, people are used to buying cars there, so they're used to spending more money than you think. I think there's a comfort of transaction there with the brand. But we have to create something that has some sort of community, I believe, that makes people interested. And like I said, there's 120 million users of eBay. That's, and they all have art in their house in some sort of way. There's 3 million artists in America, maybe more. It's that's a lot of voices out there that could use something. It's not a place for selling Norman Rockwell or Robert Ryman, I don't think.
See, I think it could be a place to sell Norman Rockwell and Robert Ryman eventually.
It won't be, what you will see will not be it's not just more listings of what there is now, but well, the advantage of Saatchi online is you've got one place with one methodology doing a lot of art, rather than 100 galleries each uploading one or two things when they feel like it that they can't sell. So they're not, the mom and pop shops aren't too efficient. The galleries are not too efficient when it comes to reaching a big audience.
Actually, auction houses have to hate this idea.
Auction houses should be embracing it to deal with their lower-end thing. And they're doing it themselves. Christie's will have 40 online auctions in the next year, online only. They don't have 120 million registered users.
When you're buying for your top clients who want, to have the most kind of exclusive and elite collections, do they care if what they're buying comes from eBay as opposed to from a sort of top respected dealer?
But it wouldn't be from eBay though, because ultimately it would be
auction
from the seller, which I would imagine, especially for the higher end stuff, would have some sort of validation. Right? It would be a gallery or an art dealer, or it could be like Steve Smith on the street.
But that's not a compelling value proposition to add another middleman to the layer. I would think that the appeal would be that eventually, even if that's what you do at the beginning to form the kind of community that you were talking about, that eventually if I had a great artwork, I could just sell it directly and pay one commission to one person and not have to give it to an auction house that then puts it on eBay.
I think the users will determine the future, and people who are 20 have a different relationship to the structure than people who are 60. So I think it's too soon to say. Right now, unfortunately, brand names are so strong, whether it's David's Vermeer, Sotheby's, eBay, whatever, that they dominate the art more than the art form itself.
Questions?
Somebody else.
Oh, there's someone else?
Somebody else had a question?
All right, you again, sir.
Having worked at an internet art company in the 90s when most of you guys were in grammar school, a lot of effort was wasted on trying to put things into categories. And I think that the solution is going to be a visual solution rather than, which will be tricky because you're either an art company or technology in the days of technology company. Trying to come up with a visual solution rather than, well, it's expressionism, but it's also abstract. It's like, that's the rabbit hole of disaster. That'll be called artsy. It's not going to work. It's going to be, the solution's going to be in a way that will be less clear.
But I mean, again, I think back to cars or to, high-end watches or something like that, where like, if people are clients of that, I mean, you could call, your Panerai watch, a Timex, but people are going to look at it and know. So in terms of the arts, art, if it's going to be somebody who has a name or a career, then it isn't the blue cat, with disrespect to blue cats. I think there's going to be enough consensual perspective on what something is or is not. And there'll be enough professionalism in the people who are selling it because these things aren't $10. And I think that there will be preset categories. If you're selling a Ford Mustang, it is a Ford Mustang, and it will be in the Ford Mustang category. And if it's not, you're not going to sell it. You're wasting your money. So, and if you're lying, someone will call you on it and you'll be kicked out. So I think eventually the market sort of polices itself in that regard.
Well, you have two different audiences. My clients can get on a plane and go to London to see a painting tomorrow. They have that advantage. If you're bidding for a $1,000 painting, you can't do that. You have different people with different roles. These are going to be two such separate things that I'm involved with. One, very elitist. The other, incredibly, well, let's just say open. They all have different solutions.
Yeah, but in
Why
terms
does
of
contemporary art have more conversation behind it than design or anything else?
Well, but I don't think this project is going to supplant criticism, dialogue, gallery shows. I mean, I get the impression that this is more of a secondary market or things that galleries have in-house. I mean, it's not. I don't see this as being sort of in lieu of the system where people have the opportunity to go and see things and work gets discussed. And I mean, I think this is something.
3 million artists, self-described, or 4 million, more than lawyers in this country. It's a lot of people out there trying to communicate. It's a lot of.
But when you say 3 million artists, do you see all of those as people that want to potentially sell their work? Do you think there's an inherent connection between being an artist and wanting to sell something?
I see those as 3 million potential buyers.
Buyers. Oh, so the buyers will be the artists.
Listen, if you're an artist, you're going to want art on your walls, aren't you? And I've never been to anybody's house, including in the projects in New York, that doesn't have art on its walls of some sort.
Usually that happens through trades and things like that, though.
You know,
I don't know.
if each of
I
these
bought
3 million...
I mean, it's never anything expensive or high-end or poor, but I mean, I try, maybe it's because of what I do in terms of the earth journalism-y thing, but I try not to trade too much stuff because I feel like people should be paid for what they do. I mean,
Right.
If each of those 3 million artists spend $1,000 a year on other people's art, it's a $3 billion business. And there's not a lot to think that people care enough making art to describe themselves as artists might not want to have something. Yes, it might be more decorative. There may be dogs playing poker. Some people like that. And maybe you have abstract paintings that are pleasing. There's so much more than the 50 artists that are going to be in the canon of history.
But this gentleman, I think that brings us back to this gentleman's point, though, in terms of you have to go. Sorry. So in terms of setting value, right? Like, I mean, thank you very much for coming.
Well, that really brings us to time, right? So if you have questions for any of the panelists individually, please feel free to pop up and ask us. But I think that closes out the panel. I mean, without Josh, what can we do? Richard, do you want to do your dick joke?
I feel like the time is coming on. Sorry. Next time.
No, you are.
We'll have to pay pay the penalty on our contract.
Thank you very much.